The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, welcome to our webinar, Leveraging Your CMS to Build and Manage Single-Page Apps. I'm Alexandra Barcelona, Director of Marketing at .cms, and I'll be today's moderator. Let's start with a bit of housekeeping. Today's webinar will run approximately 1 hour. We'll have a Q&A session at the end, so please feel free to submit your questions in the panel on your screen. And we'll be sending out the webinar recording to everyone who registered for you to review and share with your colleagues. Today's webinar will cover customer experiences and how they set the pace, what are single-page apps, .cms and single-page apps, and how to implement single-page apps with .cms, followed by our Q&A session. I'd like to introduce today's speakers. We have Stefan Schinkel, Chief of Sales at .cms, and John Hartley, Team Director at Dynamit. With that, I'll pass it on to you, Stefan.
Thanks, Alex. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today in this webinar. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. But before we go into details around single-page apps, I would like to take one step back and paint a picture around the space that we're operating in and why single-page apps can be, very helpful to execute on a digital strategy or an ambition, so you will, right? Because that's basically what we see. Most organizations that we're talking to, and you'll probably recognize this, are executing on a digital ambition. And whether it's optimizing the business with digital or transforming the business or do both, right? And this is some research based on Gartner amongst the CEOs. Oddly enough, there's also people that do not have any ambition. So I think they don't care about single-page apps either. Anyway, digital is really the key enabler to help you in that regard, right? Executing on that digital ambition and transformation. Driving operational excellence by offering self-service scenarios or automate business processes like marketing automation, Salesforce automation, or contact centers, leveraging artificial intelligence and bots and what have you. That's really all about driving operational excellence, and at the same time, it's a great opportunity to create new business models, delivering new products and services, and generating additional revenue streams, right? So it's a very exciting time to leverage digital and make this happen. And digital is also a great opportunity to differentiate from the competition, right? So again, already in 2016, a research done by the World Economic Forum and Accenture was stating that organizations can differentiate by focusing on customer experiences rather than the actual products and services, as well as hyper-personalization, right? So I think that resonates really well in the field that we're operating in. And when it comes to delivering digital products and digital experiences, there's a couple of things that we see happening, right? So the need to deliver faster at a lower total cost of ownership and achieving a higher return on investment on digital platforms becomes the norm, right? So that really puts quite some constraints around selecting technology that help you to do all of this, right? So when it comes to the demands around digital, we see a couple of things, right? So on the business side of things, we see a need for advanced tooling, being able to control more independently from technology teams, being able to have maximum flexibility, ease of use of the tools that you're using, no restrictions when it comes to design and business creativity, and lastly, also having insights in what is happening with all the touch points and the digital experiences that they're building. Now, on the technology side, we see a need and a demand to work with innovative technology that is basically supporting the business and keeping up with how the business wants to go to market. And obviously, scalability and performance have been there for a long time and remain to be there. As we move more towards digital, obviously scalability and performance remain crucial. But also the ease of interoperability, integrating platforms with one another and adjacent technology, also deploying those technologies faster with lower effort, as well as performing upgrades in the platform for the different technologies that you have deployed, right? So these are some of the key demands that we see over and over when it comes to selecting digital platforms. And at the same time, we see a number of trends, right? So on the business side, there's a need to deliver customer experiences, digital experiences based on data, right? So that is definitely a huge trend. Having actionable insights, actionable analytics based on that data is definitely a trend. And at the same time, having tools that require no coding and can help them to support their business goals without having to engage technology teams, right? So that's really on the business side. On the technology side, there's a huge trend to build actually private clouds, right? So whereas marketing teams tend to use the cloud as a mechanism to circumvent technology teams internally, you now see that technology teams with larger enterprises reclaim that territory where they want to build, their cloud stack and orchestrate all the business applications for the business, right? So that's where containerization, API first products, as well as microservices and serverless architectures come into play. But also leveraging front-end JavaScript frameworks is definitely a trend in pretty much every customer and prospect that we're talking to. They mention one of the popular frameworks. And that brings us basically to single-page apps who are basically built with those front-end frameworks. So let's take a closer look into single-page apps, right? So this is not something new. First frameworks showed up in 2010. They were backed by large tech companies like Google for Angular JS and Facebook with React. And they are very popular for some specific use cases, right? So let's look what those use cases are and when it makes sense to build and deploy a single page app, right? So if the business team really wants to have more control over the customer experience and the presentation of the touch point, then a single page app potentially could fit well. High traffic websites is also a use case where single page app perform better than the standard multi-page apps. Same goes for high performing applications. I see a lot of applications in insurance and banking these days. These are all single page apps leveraging one of these frameworks. But also, if you want to have a quick, time to market from a development perspective and reuse components and elements that you've built before, working with those frameworks definitely has some advantages. And lastly, you see them a lot in mobile first and mobile only digital strategies. It doesn't mean that you can't use them for desktop experiences, but that's definitely where you see a lot of those frameworks. There's also a couple of downsides, obviously, with SPAs, just like any other technology. So a single page app will load all the relevant content and libraries at the same time, right? So the initial load time could be a little bit longer, but any other click on a single page app is definitely super fast. But again, you have to load everything initially. There could be a potential impact on search engine optimization and also the ranking. So that's something you have to take into account if this is relevant to you. Also, the analytics on which content is being consumed over those REST APIs could be limiting. It's actually an area where we are focusing on with .cms, so it's really high on our roadmap. But also the visitor, the actual user consuming that content needs to have JavaScript enabled, right? And I don't know the exact numbers, but I think there's still maybe 5 to 10% of people that have JavaScript disabled, right? So that definitely disrupts that experience. And potentially, single page apps can be less secure. I say potentially because, again, I see a lot of applications in the financial services industry. If I access my bank accounts, I'm using a single page app. So I'm not too worried about security with my banks. So I think this is something that can be well taken care of. Let me put it that way. All right, so this is what I wanted to share before we dive into the deep a little bit more. And yeah, I'd like to hand over to John Hartley with Dynamic, and can you tell us a little bit more about how to build single page apps with .cms? John, please take it away.
All right, thanks, Stefan. And my name is John Hartley. I'm with Dynamic. I'm an associate team director, and I oversee the UI team, so front end and mobile. Been working with .cms a bit, and more so their headless version. And I wanted to kind of walk through how to use .cms while building and managing single-page apps. If you're not sure what Dynamic is, Dynamic digital agency and software consultancy. We use lots of different technologies, so Vue, React, any of these front-end frameworks that we've talked about, and really use that to identify big opportunities and solve big problems. So since Stefan kind of jumped through some of the pros and cons of single-page applications, I'll surpass that information and get right into setting up .cms. So .cms, the whole setup that we're worried about here is with the content and how the content types are created and then being able to grab that information. I'm a hot sauce maker in my spare time, and so I wanted to put together a hot sauce recipe website. So that's what you'll see here. This is just one recipe content type. We have title, subtitle, featured image, spiciness level, content, and then a category for pepper types used, along with a raw image of our sauce. Moving into what that looks like. So if you're not familiar with the .cms admin, this is what a basic content type looks like as you're creating it. So you have your title, your subtitle, and featured image, as we discussed. Once you've created your content type, you can then create all of your content. In this case, we've created 4 recipes. So we have Fiery Chipotle, Reaper Madness, Jalapeno, and Habanero Mango. And so those are 4 that I want to be able to show on the front end. You'll notice that the type that I've searched for is recipe, and then everything else is fairly standard in that search console. After I create the search, and I'll go back here for a second, if you look down at the search button toward the bottom of this console, you'll see the little drop-down arrow. And when you click on that, there's an area that says Show Query. And you can then show all of the queries, including the content pull if you're writing a velocity template file. It shows the full leucine query as well. And then it shows you the REST API call URL encoded. That's what we're going to focus on because we're using JavaScript on our page. And if you look, there's the REST API with JSON. So if I click on that JSON link, it's going to show this to me. And it shows me all 4 of my individual recipes. And you can see this is a JSON structure that's just output automatically with .cms, which is one of the reasons we love it. You have your recipe content, you have your title, your spiciness level, your subtitle. Everything exists just right here in this content object. You also have the ability to look at all the ones that were selected. So you could end up setting a limit to only see a certain amount. You'll notice too that in the top, so the actual call, there's a lot of extra information in there. We have language ID set to 1, and we have some other things in there. The key piece, though, is content type recipe. So if you'll read through the very top of the screen, and I'll show this in more detail in a moment, but JSON query, and then you have plus content type : recipe. So that's telling the API to only look for content type of recipe, and that's all it's going to return. Moving into grabbing just one piece of content. So if we want to set up an individual page in our single page application for our fiery chipotle, and we just want to show one recipe and the contents within that, how would we go about doing that? So in .cms, if we go into our individual content piece, so fiery chipotle in this instance, and click on that, and we go up to permissions. From there, you can actually take a look at the identifier. And that's kind of important, but along with that, if you'll notice as we get back to the permissions and the history, you see JSON over on the right side. Once you click that link, you're able to, that just shows the identifier again, you're able to see just the content for this individual content piece. So this is JSON that's output automatically for just this ID. And again, you can see this identifier, 3FD, we'll just only talk about that. And you look over here, you have 3FD up after the ID. And so that's how we're going to grab just one piece of content for our single page application. The recipe content is a WYSIWYG. So if you're looking in there and you see a lot of HTML, that's the markup that's generated when you use the WYSIWYG. And so from there, we can output that directly to our single page application. So setting up your single page app. Now, Stefan mentioned a couple different ones, Angular, React, Vue. You also have Meteor and Ember, lots of different SPA choices. And so really whatever you're most comfortable with, that's fine. What I ended up using is Vue. And to start off, I like to use a tool like Vue CLI, which just gives you a nice command line interface and then allows you to build out your project with just a few commands. React has create React app, so very similar there, and able to spin something up very fast. Along with Vue CLI, when you use this, you automatically get a router installed. And so that's one of the key pieces of single page applications, is being able to create all of your routing from just your single page application. So you'll see in here we have routes, and that just points to different parts of our site. So yeah, path is just the base, and that's going to use our recipes component. And that recipes component is going to show all of our recipes. From there, you may notice I have component and then import. The way that that's working is as I import that, it's noticing, okay, I know that I want to lazy load this component. And because we're importing it right here in our routes, it's able to do so. Now, again, different SPA frameworks are going to have different ways of doing this, but this helps reduce the initial load time and start to chunk things out a bit more. With tools like Webpack and Gulp, we can now create little bite-sized chunks that are much easier to consume in a browser. You'll also notice under Export Default New Router, the mode is history. And so this is one where sometimes people will cite, well, I don't want to see the hashtag in my URL. I don't want to see that at all. And so by using mode history with the Vue router, I'm able to get that removed. So that's a pretty nice little feature there. When we look at our template for Vue, this is just a very basic template and how we're outputting that recipes component. So we have inside the template element here our H1 for recipes, and then we're going to loop over a set of data. In this case, it's called recipes. And for each of those recipes, we then have the title, we have an image, we have spiciness level, and all these other little bits of content that our JSON was outputting. In the actual script portion of this, you have get recipes down at the bottom, and you'll notice that we have get and then API content render false type JSON query, and we're just going for all of the recipes that exist in our site. And I believe we'll see in a minute a more detailed version of that. Slugify, this is used for just a way to convert the data once we actually grab it, and I'll go through that in more detail in a moment. So what does that look like when it's actually output? We have now our 4 pieces of recipe content that we talked about, and each one has an image. It has the title, the spiciness level, subtitle. Then we also have by ID and by slug. In many cases, you won't have both of those on there because you'll make a decision as to whether you want to show it by slug or by ID, and we'll get into that here in the next slide. So we have our 2 links, which are by ID and also by slug. Using that slugify method that I had shown, we can convert the title and make it lowercase, add a dash, and it outputs to what we see in the bottom, which is recipe/fiery chipotle. Now, if we just wanted to use that identifier, it's pretty easy to do so. There's no method that you need to use. There's no converting that you have to do with the information. It's just recipes / the identifier that exists there. To me, I prefer the second way of doing that, so actually showing the route in a nice, easy, human-readable version. If you want to go with the identifier, that's fine also. So the single recipe routing ID, we take a look at how we do this in our routing. We have our path, which is recipes/:ID, and from here, we are knowing to look specifically for the ID that we got through the .cms admin. And so you'll see the get recipe function down here through Axios. We're just using route.params.id, and it's using that full identifier to then get all of the information. Once we do that, we use Vue to store the recipe data, and it'll just sit within our page. This gets even easier if we're using some store like Vuex as state management. For the single recipe routing slug edition, very similar. You'll see in the path up top, we have :slug. And so that's where we've made it lowercase. We've added a hyphen, and it's going to have the title of the actual recipe. When we look in computed, we're going to deslugify it because we now need to look for the title, which, if you recall back in setting this up, we had made it unique. We made the title unique, so you can't ever have more than one that is specifically fiery chipotle. You could have different versions of that, different iterations, but you can only have one that is named fiery chipotle, which allows us to then, in the title array, use specifically the catch-all that is specific to that title. And now when we look down at Axios under get recipe, we are able to put directly in there the full title array query and see how that looks overall. Once we get the recipe page data, it gets stored in our Vue instance. And so here's just the data of the page, the recipe slug, and we have the data that we saw on the .cms side. So pretty easy to put together. We see also, we have the single recipe pages. I was talking about the WYSIWYG content. And for Vue, we have v-html, and we're able to just toss the WYSIWYG content in there, and it's going to render out all that markup. So it makes it nice and easy to, in a template, write minimal code in your single page application and be able to output that full information that someone has used on the WYSIWYG side in .cms. One other thing I like to talk about is a mobile-first responsive approach with single-page applications. So as Stefan was talking about, sometimes you have a mobile-first or only mobile version of a single-page application. And the main reason for that is we now have the ability to, from just a headless standpoint, use those APIs to put the information anywhere. So you have your phones that go down to about 320 pixels wide to an 80-inch TV. Even refrigerators at this point are able to show the web and display our pages. 5.135 billion mobile users, and that was from Pew Research Center. So really good idea to think about that mobile size first and then expand up from there. My final note here, only clients and developers squish. I don't know how deep you've gone into responsive development before, but really the only people that sit there and kind of squish the browser down and up are developers, and then the clients that developers are building sites for. So really, you just keep going until something breaks and then build out your CSS in that way. So just with a very quick grid here, I've been able to add my widths and make sure that it looks the different ways that I want it to on different screen sizes. So you'll see here I'm squishing it down. It goes to 2, it goes to 1. So a mobile view is only going to have 1. A more tablet view is going to have 2. And then desktop is going to have all 3. Pretty easy to do. There are different grid frameworks out there that you can use pretty easily. Bootstrap is something that a lot of people like to use for prototyping. So that's always an option as well. I like to keep accessibility in mind when I'm creating single page applications. Different issues that arise with accessibility and single page apps is as you're moving through the page, sometimes, unless you've set it up with something like View Announcer or React Ally Announcer, you're not able to actually tell somebody that the page has changed. Because everything is contained within this single application, a user with a screen reader may click a link and they may go to the next page, but nothing happens. Nothing happens for the screen reader, so nothing is identified. And View Announcer and React Ally Announcer, they just let you know route has changed to whatever the new route is and are able to explain from there any more information that you've set up programmatically. Bypass blocks, as we saw in kind of the design for the recipes. If I am a user who has to hop through that menu every time, it might get a little cumbersome. So being able to let someone jump from the top of your page directly into the content is something that we like to put in pretty much all of our websites. Focus management is another issue that we run into with single page applications. Main thing there is if you open a modal, make sure that the focus of the page is actually going into the modal, and then the user is still able to navigate through the page, get out of the modal correctly. And it's a whole other topic that we could get into, so I'll just brush on it very briefly. And assuring your users that they will be able to know where they're going next is extremely important. And so we really identify with the WCAG 2.0 and 2.1 criteria and try to make sure that we're hitting at least AA. So if you're not currently doing that, it's definitely something to keep in mind as you move forward with a single page application. So now we're tying it all together. We've built our single page application. We have built out our content types. We've built out our content pieces. We know the different API calls that we have to make. And so now we'll look at the images. So you saw the individual recipes. Each of those has an image attached to it. And there are 2 main types of images in .cms. We have a featured image, which is the image field. That's just an image component that you use in your content type. Then there's also a binary field, which in this case we've called raw image. And you can see it up above. With featured image, we get an identifier, right? So we've been using the identifier to call content. And in a similar way, we can get an image based on the image identifier. Now, there is also the raw image, which points directly to the JPEG that was uploaded. This is untouched. It is essentially the exact same as when you put it into the .cms system, and then the content asset as well as an identifier / raw image. One of the reasons that I like using just the identifier, so just using that image field that we were talking about, is that you get a lot more options in terms of how you display the image. So .cms has an image processing API, and these are all the different features you get. So crop, exposure, you can do a lot of different bits and pieces with this, a lot of editing to your photo without having to go into Photoshop, without having to open an editor. This is all just through the image processing API. And so breaking that down a bit more, the base for an image is just /content asset /image. And then from there, the ID and more, we have just the recipe.featured image. That's the identifier right there. Then you use /file asset /filter. From here, you can start using the image processing API pieces that we were talking about. And in this instance, we're using resize and JPEG. And what we're doing there with resize is making it 300 pixels wide. So it's going to scale it down and make sure that it is only 300 pixels wide to best use across our app. The JPEG part, we want it to be a progressive JPEG. That way it loads at a very base level, and then as the data is coming in, it builds up more resolution. Pretty easy to use, and definitely recommend checking out everything that is in the image processing API. It's very helpful, and especially for responsive images, being able to, based on your screen width, serve new and different images. So with source set or picture fill or the picture element itself, you also have responsive components in both Vue and React that you can use and identify, okay, when the screen size is between this and this, let's use this image. When it's this big, let's use this other image. So being able to pick and choose is really going to help in terms of the data load on your individual users. Now, as we were putting together the API, we were seeing lots of pluses and some minuses in there as well. And that's all a part of the loosing queries for search that we get directly out of the box with .cms. And so I'm not going to go through each of these individually, but the key one that we've used is the plus sign, as well as the search all fields, so the catch-all. In here, you can see that we're creating that catch-all system. So this is for a search page that we've built. There's the search by, and then in here, we're going to split out that search query, and we're going to start to string it together with the catch-all. So once we have that catch-all built out, we can then search through the .cms content pieces that we have. And down here, you'll notice at the bottom, inside that search function, that we are stringing that together and creating the loosing query of content type : recipe, which will only target recipes at this point as content type. And then it uses the this.searchBy, which is just that search by computed value that we've created up top. Now to see that in motion, we take a look at our search page and just a GIF of going through and adding in different search terms, being able to bring them up based on what is in the title or what is in the peppers that have been used. Because we're using that catch-all, it is looking through all of the individual fields, which is why, and I'll start this again, once we get to Hob, it should potentially just show habanero related images and recipes, and right there it does. But Fiery Chipotle, it's not in the title, but because one of the pepper types used in there, which is the category we created, we're able to then have it appear in that search functionality. So custom content API with VTL. Now this is going to change a bit in upcoming .cms releases. I believe 5.1 is where we're going to have new REST endpoints without having to write any Java, which is pretty exciting, or lightweight endpoints. And this will then kind of become out of date. So I'm hoping that we can get our hands on that 5.1 here soon. But what we've done is essentially create an API in a different way using VTL files and able to serve it up a bit differently. So we've built out a custom single page app homepage. And in this case, I built a Bob's Burgers website, one of my favorite cartoons. Not sure if you're familiar with it. But essentially, we have a homepage that has these different slider chunks, and we can go throughout the page and scroll through. Looks nice. And then we also have a few different menu items up top. How are we actually building that content, though, is the kind of custom aspect of this. So here's the homepage JSON. Essentially, all we've done is in a VTL file that renders the initial page, it's searching through all the individual parts and it's coming up with our different pieces on this homepage. So you can see here we have the background image, we have background mobile, a bunch of different other pieces like CTA text, and then we'll get into Beef Squash momentarily, but there's a title down there as well. We also use an API for the footer. We want to be able to take off these share items if we want to. Like, let's say we're not going to use Pinterest anymore. We want our client to be able to uncheck a box and have it not show. And so our output API-wise looks like this, where we have Facebook enabled, true. Instagram enabled, true. So with all those set to true, they will show up in our footer as they do properly. So what does that look like on the back end? We've created a footer content type, and in here we have the social links. So there are footer callouts and social links, and in the social links you'll see that Instagram enabled, true, YouTube enabled, true. And so that's the content that's getting pulled for our footer. So the Beef Squash character you see over there, Gene Belcher in one of the episodes puts on this Sasquatch mask, and just kind of hilarity ensues from there. As you click that, we want content to show up. We also wanted to be able to place that wherever we wanted. And so we created a custom component called a Beef Squash card. And in here, we have the ability in .cms to add a hero, add the background, add the mobile hero, the Beef Squash title, and the Beef Squash copy that's going to show up when we click on that. And this is just a custom component. So what we showed with the recipes, that's something that a front-end developer could do all of it without having to contact a back-end developer and bother them about it, because you can set up the entire content type and you can set up the content API pretty easily with just the drag and drop ability that .cms has. In this case, though, we got one of our back-end developers to create this custom component for us through VTL files and really give us a lot more flexibility and customization. So what that looks like, the actual place Beef Squash part, the Beef Squash selector, we can now click anywhere on this background, and that background is what's being pulled in from that background section in the Beef Squash card. We can click anywhere on there and place our Beef Squash. So we placed them up here. We had them large just so we had a better idea of where it would be on the page. And that will then output in our API the actual coordinates. It'll give us Beef Squash X and Y coordinates, and that is then used on the front end in the single page application as a percentage. So we're going to absolutely position it, and on the X plane, we're going to put it 15% from the left, and we're going to put it 40% from the top of the page. So now we have it rendered on the page, 15% from the left, 40% from the top. When we click on it, we can see our actual Beef Squash content that we've placed in there, and then we move on to a different page. This is some of the VTL that I was talking about. So for our menu section, we have this for each loop that is going to take a look at the dot content and pull related menu sections. So all of our individual menu sections, which then will loop over and grab all of our individual menu items. And when we go to the URL of /menu, and then we have a query parameter on there that allows us to identify, okay, we're looking specifically for the JSON content, which is generated right here by this VTL. So you'll see we have title, description, calorie range, etc., and image. From there, we also have this output. So this is the JSON that's output by our VTL file. And from here, we have landing page card, which you saw on the home page. But the menu piece is what we're talking about now. So we have menu, we have different sections called featured and cheese themed. Inside of cheese themed, I have open different items that we can go through. So we have a title, we have the URL slug, we have the description and an image. That way, as we click on those, that route will change in the URL, and we'll be able to actually go in and send that to our friends. So if we want it specifically to go to cheese 1, we can just send that off, and that person will be able to access that same page. So you'll notice in the URL bar that as we click through, we're on the menu, now we're on menu /slider 1. And so that goes away. We're on fries, product, and we get menu / fries 3. And so that's really how easy it is with the view router and with any sort of single page application router to make sure that people can access your content in the same way. Wanted to talk about vanity URLs real quick. You'll notice here that we have at the very bottom, it's CMS homepage, and that forwards directly to application dist index.html. That index.html file is what contains all of our single page app markup and points directly to our individual JavaScript, which you'll see toward the top. We have JavaScript, images, and fonts, and those are then pointing directly to our fonts, images, and our JavaScript. So there's a little extra work that you have to do here to make sure everything is pointing to the correct location, but the rewards here are highly outweigh the not really a risk. Risk would be the wrong word. I'm not sure what I'm going for, but it's pretty simple to set up and something that has worked out pretty well. So the vanity URL, easy to set up. As I was saying, you have the title, you have the URL that you want to point to, and then where are you going to forward it to? You're going to forward it directly to there. And as I mentioned, adding an additional query parameter that is pointing directly to JSON format is what ends up getting us that menu JSON. And so that menu index.html file, once we go through our browser and through our site and our application, we're able to see exists right here, and that's what's going to the home page. So that is it for me in terms of going through the single page application. Hopefully you learned something. And again, like I said, you don't always have to use Vue. That's just what we've used in this instance. Email address is here as well in case you'd like to contact me afterward. And I believe now we will move into a Q&A session. So I will kick it back over to Stefan.
Hi guys. See for the questions. There's a couple of questions coming in. First question: how easy can I start building SPAs if I'm already using CMS for other? That's a good question. Let me take that question. The answer is really very easy. Remember that .cms is an API-driven platform, so there's really no restrictions to start embedding SPAs in an existing websites that are already powered by .cms. Next question. Can I still meet accessibility criteria when using SPAs in my digital strategy? John, can you look into that one?
Yeah, so for single page applications and accessibility, it's really the same as if you were just building a static website. I still want to keep all of your markups, semantic, heading structure in order as well. And so just because JavaScript is involved doesn't mean that it automatically becomes inaccessible. You really just have to think a bit more about how you're managing some of your different focus elements. So as I was walking through, the Vue announcer and React Ally announcer, both of those allow you to, with routes, make sure that you're updating the user and letting them know what's happening. That way, if they click on something and it goes elsewhere and nothing actually changes in their screen reader, you can tell them that something has changed, the route has changed. So overall, not a concern. We've used single page applications and met accessibility criteria. So it's really more just a matter of writing your markup semantically.
Right, good stuff. Next question, does .cms have any limitations for specific frameworks? I can take that one. Well, answer is simply no. you actually have total freedom to work with any JavaScript framework you want to build your single-page apps that are content-driven by .cms, right? So whether it's Angular, React, Vue, Amber, you name it, no restrictions from .cms. Another question coming in. I think that's one for you, John. Can I build SPAs in the editorial environment of .cms?
So building single-page applications in the editorial environment is a bit interesting. With the Pages API, that's one easy way to leverage .cms in order to be able to kind of move things around and still use those different containers. That's kind of my main use of it so far in order to keep using that environment. Also, your main index file can actually serve up all of this single page application stuff for you. So you don't need two separate servers, that one hosting the single page application and one hosting .cms. All of it can be done from the same environment, and that's how we've used it previously.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, and I also want to talk a little bit roadmap. I mean, one of our key items that we want to deliver in version 5.1 in Q1 of 2019 is actually enhanced support for single-page apps. So what you will see in the authoring environment is enhanced support basically in the core product for editors when they manage content for single-page apps. So stay tuned. We'll share obviously pretty shortly what we're going to deliver and when we're going to deliver. Right now it's slated for Q1, but we're still contemplating whether that's January, March, or February. Obviously you want to deliver a kick-ass version of .cms. And I think these are the questions that we have so far. I just want to give people a final opportunity to ask any question that they might have in the chat. I'm not seeing anything else at the moment.
Stefan, it looks like we have a couple of questions in here. One of them is,
sure.
Will you guys be adding a training video to .cms for single-page applications?
If we are going to create a video, I think that's a great idea to create a video on how to create single-page apps with .cms. I mean, that's obviously something we'll continue to do in how to adopt CMS in a broader sense, but particularly in this trending area. I mean, it's really hot right now in our space, so I can totally see us do this and expose it on our usual channels, whether it's blog or the documentation website. But good question.
There's another one here that I think came up when we were going through some of the API stuff, and it seems that content type and data are closely related. This is 100% correct with .cms. So those APIs that I was showing you, those are the content APIs that just come out of the box. So as you build out your content types, as you're creating your content for those content types, those immediately become available via an API. So the content type that you're creating, you don't really need to do much other than drag and drop the different components as you're creating your content type. As soon as you do that, those become available over the API. So very tightly related and very easy to update. A lot of times you would have to go to a backend developer and say, hey, I need this new field. Can you add that to the API? It would take them, however long based on their schedule. And so .cms really takes that away and allows you to do it yourself. At .cms Bootcamp, I joked that at this point with single-page applications and .cms, you have no need for back-end developers. Obviously, was just joking, but it does give you a lot more freedom. Now, the velocity template files, that's where you get even more freedom, and so that's where a back-end developer becomes insanely helpful. Anything else to add to that, Stefan?
No, I think you're spot on. There's absolutely nothing I need to add there.
Cool.
I still see one final question. Is there any way the app can get the data from the other source but still display on the content type on the CMS? What's your take on that, John?
I'm a little confused by the question, so I'll try to answer it as best as I can. So anyway, the app can get the data from the other source but still display on the content type on the CMS. So kind of what I was mentioning with the content types, that is generating that API. And so the app that we created, that single page application, that is all just in an index file on our .cms environment. So it's really just rerouting that data because we're consuming it as an API. And so they're connected in that way. And hopefully that answers the question. If it doesn't, feel free to send me an email. I think I had that on my last slide there, or just follow up with one of us from .cms.
Exactly. Yeah, I was going to say, feel free to drop me an email, stefan.schinkel@.cms.com. We'll be happy to answer your question or get on a call if needed to elaborate and help you, build, single page apps. All right. I think this is the end of the show, guys. John, Alex, I would like to thank you both for helping delivering this webinar, and I wish everybody a great rest of the day, and we'll be back shortly.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.